Thank you, Master of Ceremony. Dr. Subramanian Swamy, he had done PhD in economics from Harvard University, thesis under Nobel laureate Simon Kuznets, and jointly authored research on index number theory with Nobel laureate Paul Samuelson. He is a assistant and associate professor of economics at Harvard University. Presently, he is holding the government positions, member of parliament for 6th term since 1974, 3 Lok Sabha and 3 Rajya Sabha. Presently a member of Rajya Sabha upper house. He has authored various books, to name a few: Economic Development and Reform in India and China, A Comparative Perspective, The Foundations of Index Number Theory, Corruption and Governance in India, The Case of the 2G Spectrum Scam. Friends, I can say only few words that he speaks by heart, and his heart is supported by the evidences. With conviction he always speaks. With these few words, I welcome Dr. Subramanian Swamy'S. Please give with big round of applause.
Mr. Agarwal, other office bearers on the stage, and ladies and gentlemen of this great profession called Chartered Accountancy. I first got a serious look at Chartered Accountancy when I studied the National Herald case. There I found that a 5 lakh rupee private limited company was able to hold as a wholly owned subsidiary a 5,000 crore assets company by just paying 50,000 rupees, or 50 lakhs, excuse me. I would also like to do that kind of bargain. And of course, soon enough I found that there was criminal misappropriation, breach of trust, 420, and all that. So that dissuaded me from doing it. But the chartered accountants were not at fault, because once I got the balance sheets of the company, which was only with 5 lakh authorized capital, and the company with 5,000 crore assets company, I knew that the chartered accountants had done their job, and that's how I was able to catch them. I don't think chartered accountants should be held responsible for fudging in the company accounts. I think they should be, the chief financial officer of the company should be held responsible. And maybe he should be required to file an affidavit that all the facts that he supplied to chartered accountants are true to his knowledge. That would ensure that the actual health of the companies are become known to the public. Of course, there have been chartered accountants, like there have been bad politicians, bad doctors, bad lawyers. There are bad chartered accountants. And the classic case is that of Enron, whereby constantly pushing everything to contingency liabilities, a false sense of health was created for the company. And ultimately, when it was found out, the company collapsed. And its top management people had to go to jail. So, therefore, I accept invitations whenever the chartered accountants give me, because I get something to learn. Now I got some new books on GST, and I would like to say a few words about GST also today, before giving the general picture of the economy today. I had in fact on May 9th, written a 16-page letter to the Prime Minister, telling him in the letter that there were 5 storm signals which he has to take note of, and that the growth rate calculation would show a deceleration, not an acceleration, and he has to take corrective steps for that. And I applied the now world-famous Samuelson-Swamy theorem on index numbers and showed what the real GDP growth rate is and not what is coming in the media. And today, the Reserve Bank and the Central Statistical Organization both have confirmed what I said, and that's not a surprise because I had based it on their data to come to a conclusion, but in May. There are many other storm signals which we need to note. There has been a consistent decline in the new jobs generated in the sector. This is largely because the medium and small industries, they have been squeezed of capital, and the reason they have been squeezed is the cost of capital has gone up. And the reason the cost of capital has gone up is the previous governor, Mr. Raghuram, he had insisted on going on raising the interest rates. And his philosophy was that he can control inflation only by raising interest rates. But that's like a doctor saying that the only way he can bring down the temperature of a patient is to kill him. Once he is dead, the temperature will definitely come down, of course. But you have to understand, and that is why I'm a little wary of employing for in economic matters, those who have got degrees only in management science, because management science teaches you bilateral transactions, whereas economics is a very complex subject of general equilibrium. And what you do in one sector affects all sectors, and by a process of input and output transactions. In 1925, the American president called all his top economic advisors and said, "I'm very unhappy that the unemployment rate is so high, and I would like to reduce it. So what should be done?" So the economists were unanimous at that time, and they said that the only way you can increase is by the usual economic law of demand and supply, and therefore you lower the wage rates. You persuade the labor unions to agree to a wage cut, and then you will see that employment will increase and therefore unemployment will come down. Well, the president negotiated with the labor unions, and sure enough, that's what happened. He was able to persuade them. So the wage rates were cut. And after the wage rates were cut, the unemployment increased and not decreased. So they were all puzzled, and they began a search as to what could be wrong. Now, it took a British economist called John Maynard Keynes to explain that when you cut wages, the purchasing power of the public also goes down. And if the purchasing power of the public goes down, then what happens is that the demand for products across the economy goes down, and that causes a depression, and that depression means unemployment, and that's exactly what happened in 1930. So this lack of knowledge of the general equilibrium setup of the economy is what is causing most of our problems today. When we bring all these experts from abroad, they may be Indians, but they don't live in India. The moment they lose their job, they go back to their American job. So therefore, I'm not against American education. I myself got American education, plus taught there, but I came and I stayed put. And every time the Prime Minister wants to send me abroad, I've said, no, I'll not take that job. Recently offered me the presidentship of the BRICS Bank. I said, no, I'm not going. The salary was, of course, obscene, but I'm not in need of a salary just now. So I'm saying the commitment. The commitment to the country plus the knowledge of the general equilibrium network of the country is extremely important. And therefore, when you raise interest rates, the cost of capital goes down. Big industries perhaps can survive that because they have access to funds abroad. But it's the small and medium industries who depend totally on domestic financing that get affected. Their cost of capital goes up and they have to close down. And if you look at the data for the small and medium industries, it has been deplorable. And this is one of the storm signals I pointed out to the Prime Minister in my letter, that they are suffering, and much of the unemployment, because 60% of our employment in our country is due to small and medium industries. And therefore the focus has to be on that and the health of these small and medium industries. So therefore I would say that if you look at our economy today, there are many things which puzzle me. One is that our last 3 years rather, both the imports and exports have collapsed, have come down. It takes some kind of miracle is going on, because normally exports and imports don't simultaneously decline. But they have declined. Of course, the officials in the Commerce Ministry have put out saying that the trade deficit has gone down as an achievement. But what has happened is that the imports have gone down faster than the exports, and therefore the trade deficit is bound to go down. So this is something that needs to be corrected. Why is it that the export industry is not doing well? And why are you not able to export more? Why is this declining? This is the second thing for which we need to give a serious thought. The indebtedness of households is also now increasing. This is something that needs to be addressed. In fact, today, one of the biggest tragedies that have taken place over the last 10 years is that the household share in the total in domestic savings in the country have come down from 35% of the total domestic savings to 29%. No other country, by the way, household savings is such a large proportion of the total domestic savings. In China, it's only 15%. In the United States, it is negative because they are all on credit. So India is a country where the households have played a major role in providing domestic savings. And for that, we have to give credit to women, because like Lakshmi, they have been in charge of household finance, and they have been salting away money and saving money. So therefore, we have to address this also. And to address this, and particularly the middle class which does the savings, what we need to do is to encourage them. And encourage them in some concrete ways in which it might put some of your chartered accountants out of business, namely by abolishing income tax. The most important measure the country needs today, which has immediate impact on the economy, is the abolition of income tax, and that must be done, otherwise it can't be improved. Much of the corruption today is due to income tax. And if in this country, you cannot motivate people by force. You cannot motivate people by threatening prosecution. The only way you can motivate this country's people is by incentives. The day you abolish income tax, nobody is going to splurge that money. They will save that money. We should lower the interest rates. The prime lending rate is 12%. Should have it not more than 9% for fixed deposits of 5 years. If you can have the rate of the loans being given at 9%, and your fixed deposits be getting 9%, the economy will prosper because the rate of investment will shoot up and go up to 40%. And if you manage to keep your capital output ratio at 4, you will get 10% growth rate, and because 40 divided by 4, and 10% per year for the next 10 years means all the poverty in the country will be eliminated, and we will become a global economic power ahead of China. China was not based on the indigenous growth that we have had. China was based on importing semi-processed goods from East Asia, adding value to it in Shenzhen and other places, and then exporting to the West. If you look at Chinese trade data, you will find that it has been consistently negative trade deficit. It's a deficit with East Asia countries. But it has a huge positive trade balance with Europe and America, because these East Asian countries cannot directly anymore export to United States and Europe because their labor has become expensive. And if that labor has to be substituted, the best place was China. And China labor was cheap, is cheap. It's getting less and less so, but it is cheap. And therefore they added value in industry. Indian industry is more well-rooted in this country than the Chinese industry, because the Chinese industry is based on joint ventures with foreign companies, which have brought in these semi-processed goods from Japan, and then they export that to the West. Take Lenovo laptop. It's on it is written made in China, but it is not made in China. The entire circuits and the base is produced in Taiwan. It comes to China. They put in the keyboard, they put in the glass case and the outer cover, and then put a stamp made in China, and it goes to the West and gets sold at high price. That is the Chinese model. And that model is not going to work forever because of the fact that the Chinese labor is also getting more expensive. India is a country which can do that. It can divert the East Asian semi-processed goods traffic to India, and provided our infrastructure is sufficient. Our infrastructure is adequate. We are able to turn around ships not in 7 days, but in 7 hours. That kind of efficiency comes in. This country will be able to have a huge trade with the Western world. Of course, we have other things in our country which we can export. Our agricultural products are the cheapest in the world. They are, the wheat prices compared to America is 1/4. Rice compared to Japan is 1/6. Fruits, flowers, milk, all these are exportable for us. But we haven't got that focus yet. The day we get that focus and make agriculture a globalized sector, you won't have to give subsidies to the farmers. They will earn enough from their exports to be able to do that. For that, we need to develop infrastructure in a major way. And that is what we have not been able to do because there's a backlog. It's unfair to blame our government, which has been here only for 3 years. But the 70 years backlog has produced this situation. In railways, we were ahead of China in 1948. Today, we are far behind China because the Chinese have invested in rail stock. We have to do that, otherwise more accidents are going to take place. So I'm pointing out these storm signals with a solution attached with it. And these solutions, I am telling you, are primarily which will affect the people immediately, not tomorrow, day after. That it will filter down to you. This is the mistake of Narasimha Rao, who produced massive economic changes by economic reform. I'm also happy and proud to say that the blueprints were provided by me and implemented by Narasimha Rao and executed by Mr. Manmohan Singh, but Manmohan Singh got 100% of the credit and we got nothing, neither Narasimha Rao nor I. But that doesn't matter. The man who should get the credit is Narasimha Rao. In the political office, he had the gumption, the guts, the savvy mind to be able to sell these abolitions of quotas, licenses all in one blow. We need that kind of thing. But that was not enough for him, because when he abolished quotas and licenses, the immediate rental income of those touts who used to get licenses and quotas from ministers and then give it to users, they suddenly went out of business. And they were mostly Congress party people, because that was the ruling party, so they had to be in it. And therefore, Mr. Narasimha Rao, despite producing the best results, lost the elections in 1996, and his party's strength was down to half, when he should have been celebrated as a great hero. So I'm saying today to you that we are capable of a fast growth of 10% per year without any difficulty, because already we have reached 36% domestic savings, 1 or 2% foreign investment, and now if we incentivize, this will rise to 40%, with a 4.0 capital output ratio means 10% growth rate, and 10% for 10 years means India becomes a developed country ahead of China. We are number 3 in absolute value of GDP. Now, some of the measures taken in recent past have been very, very, imaginative, has received a lot of praise. And your chartered accountants are at work very hard to make it comprehensible, because it's complex. One is the GST. I've never been against GST, although there's popular misconception that I've opposed GST. I was opposed to an appendage, a private limited company called GSTN, Gross Goods Service Tax Network. In view of the fact that we have decided to put one tax at one place, at the moment we are not doing that. I think it is 4 taxes perhaps, and at many places, but ultimately goal is to put one tax at one place, indirect tax, not the present system of every state imposing tax by itself. Therefore, you need a massive computer program which brings all this data for processing. Why processing? Because the central government, by a constitutional amendment, has today taken the authority to collect indirect taxes. And so those indirect taxes, once collected, if a product is produced in Maharashtra and sold in Madhya Pradesh, if you put the tax only where the sale takes place, Madhya Pradesh gets all the benefit. So to share this money, you need a computer program to be able to know what each company is producing where at what spot. And that is the main reason why this GSTN was set up. It was not set up by us, it was set up by the previous government. But in that GSTN, the computer program was to be decided by this private limited company called GSTN, where the government of India and the state governments put together had 49% of the shares. 51% of the shares belonged to private parties like the HDFC, the ICICI, and the LIC Household Finance Company, which is essentially a private company, and a wholly owned subsidiary of the National Stock Exchange, a newly created company, wholly owned subsidiary. Now, they had 51%, and the directors accordingly. Now, why should it be necessary to have private limited banks? They may be very good banks, but that doesn't mean you should have it. You have so many public sector banks. If they are so inefficient compared to private banks, then nationalize these public sector banks. Why are we keeping inefficient banks? But there's no indication they are any more or less inefficient than private banks. But these two banks, the shareholding is essentially in the hands of the foreigners. In fact, they're having a problem with the finance ministry, which was originally taking the view that HDFC and ICICI is not an Indian company. But the fact still remains whether they are Indian company or not an Indian company. The fact remains that the bulk of these shares are owned by foreigners. And all this sensitive data of 44 lakh companies will be fed into this computer, which GSTN does not have. And that is now GSTN has what is called as outsourced to Infosys. And Infosys is not big enough to do this job, so they've already said as of July 1 they can't do it. I don't think even now they have been able to do very much. The GSTN data, moreover, will be available to the wholly owned subsidiary of the National Stock Exchange. It will be available to three private companies, which will be giving out, could have the potential of giving out this data to foreigners, to private parties, which will give them an unfair advantage in the stock market itself, because the wholly owned subsidiary of the National Stock Exchange could very well share these with stockbrokers. There is no way. So I had in fact decided to vote against it in Parliament. But fortunately the Prime Minister agreed with two of my conditions. I had two conditions, he agreed to the two conditions. First condition is that the CAG must audit the accounts of the GSTN. Would you believe it? The entire money for computer program, all that is being provided by the government of India, even though it is a minority shareholder. And therefore, the CAG ought to audit it. This is all public money. But that was not allowed. It was barred. Fortunately, the Prime Minister intervened on June 28th and ordered that the CAG will audit the workings of the GSTN and the way they spend the money. The second was, I wanted the Home Ministry to do a security check of whether this is acceptable. Parliamentary committee set up for this purpose was unanimous that this is not secure and should be removed. And it was headed by a BJP member, and unanimously with Communist Congress, everybody in it, they said, recommended to the government, this instead of HDFC, ICICI and this LIC Housing Finance Corporation and this wholly owned subsidiary of the National Stock Exchange should be replaced by public institutions, public banks. We have got plenty of them and very big. Now, all this data is to be processed now by Infosys. Infosys doesn't have the capacity to do it. Do the government has? Yes, the government has NSDL, which has been doing for income tax all over the country. It is in a position to do it. So that is the reason why I think today, with all your very good work in simplifying and telling people, that ultimately this has to be solved before the GST can be fully operational and benefit this country. And I think that therefore now you should produce another volume on GSTN and tell the truth. I want to say that the potential of this country is so high that it's very, very important for all of us to realize and have this self-confidence. I remember when I came back from Harvard and I propagated that if India gave up Soviet socialism and adopted market economy, our growth rate will go up from the so-called Hindu rate of growth of 3.5%, which the communists didn't want to take responsibility. It was the Soviet model's growth rate of 3.5% per year. They declared it as a Hindu rate of growth. Anything bad must be Hindu, of course, according to the left wing in this country. So, the growth rate was, if the growth rate is to increase to say 10%, I had advocated market economy. I had advocated that the licenses and quotas should be removed, and that it should be based on the incentive system, it should be based on auction and so on. These I have had the opportunity later on, because I suffered a lot when I came back. I became a professor, full professor at IIT at their invitation. Mrs. Gandhi read my book, Indian Economic Planning, Alternative Approach. She was so upset with it that without knowing who I am, except that I was a professor at IIT, she read the book of select passages in Parliament and said, such people are financed by our public money to be professors in India. And the net result was that the next day I was dismissed from IIT. Of course, I went to court. That was my first tries with court. Took me 22 years, but I won the case. I rejoined for one day because I was already cabinet minister, so I couldn't teach, so I rejoined for one day. And then asked for my salary, back salary, and at 18% interest rate. For that also, they offered 10%. I said, no, 18%. I said, I'll go to court on that also. They said it'll take 22 years. I said, doesn't matter, I'll get 18% in the end. And so I'll get a big 44%, 44 years of 18%. That'll be a big amount, and I'm about to win the case. In the meantime, of course, when Janata came to power, Morarji Desai appointed me on the board of governors of IIT, the very body which dismissed me. On one condition, I accepted that all others who were sitting there who dismissed me should be dismissed first. And they were dismissed. And in 1990, when Chandrasekhar became Prime Minister, we were able to prepare the blueprints. Manmohan Singh was our economic advisor. I called him back from Geneva, where he had run away. And we worked out a blueprint, which Mr. Narasimha Rao's successor, who gave me a cabinet rank as head of the GATT Commission. He wanted me to join his party, but I told him his party is a family property, and we are all tenants there as members. And I said, you also will meet a very bad fate, I'm telling you. But anyway, he brought me in through the back door, so to speak, by giving me a chairmanship of commission. And we implemented it, and growth rate increased year by year till the last year of 8% per year. And this was a miracle. But what did we do? We just freed the people. That should be the concept. How to empower the people to stand on their own feet. This country is a people of individuals. We don't have a pope, we don't have a church, we don't have a Bible. We have Bhagavad Gita, we have Vedas, but these are all subject to your interpretations. There are sadhus in every part of India. They are in such demand that even bogus ones get in. Sometimes I am mistaken for a sadhu because my last name is Swami. I'll probably earn a lot more money if I put on Bhagwa and sat in an ashram. But the fact of the matter is that Indians are people who are bound by one culture. That was demonstrated in 1977 when the poorest of India, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, etc., they stood up and voted for democracy and defeated Mrs. Gandhi, which the educated South could not do. This shows the basic culture of this country is that we are all together. We have not been divided. We have people who are predicting in 1947 that India will break up into 20 countries. Churchill said so. Richard Nixon said so. Other countries have broken up. This great Soviet Union, which they used to extol, the communists used to extol as a place where there is no inflation, there is no unemployment, there is no poverty. Today, there is no Soviet Union also. Broken up into 16 countries. Yugoslavia into 4 countries. Indonesia into 2 countries. Pakistan into 2 countries, maybe in the future into 4 countries. So, therefore, this country has stood all kinds of crises and has stood as one. And every time there's a crisis, people come together. The performance of the Bombay people in the recent flood is something that should be celebrated all over the country. And we were once upon a time the most developed country of the world. The decline took place because of foreign invasions. But we can once again become. We contributed to science, calculus, but not to the whole world. In fact, Einstein used to popularly say that to India we owe the debt of learning how to add and subtract. They taught us how to count. This country has the talent and it requires the empowerment of the people. Not to be harassed if they do good, if they make profit, but to be able to stand. So potential is enormous. There is no limit to how much we can produce in agriculture if we give the right inputs for agriculture. There is no limit to the amount we can export. There is no limit to this young population in terms of innovations. If we can convert our 60% of the world's deposits of thorium in India to usable in a reactor to produce energy, we will not only produce enough energy for us, but for all of the world. The young people coming out of all our technical professional institutions, they are the brightest in the world. They perform abroad also. They head big corporations in America. So what is stopping us from becoming a corruption-free country? It's basically a system which empowers, which incentivizes the people, and therefore chartered accountants have a major duty in suggesting to the government from time to time that what are the simplifications in the laws that are necessary, because you're looking at it like a surgeon looks inside the body. And therefore, you have this great responsibility to bring out a manual which laws should be abolished, which should be simplified, which should be reduced, so that administrators in this country know that. And therefore, this great profession, I'm thankful to you. You invited me today. Namaste.
For one question only.
Only one question. Only one question. Sir, you told that abolish the income tax. Good. But then how the money will come? One view is coming up. Ki banking cash transaction on every deposit, let's charge 1%. What is the view on that? If every transaction in the bank, charge some 1% or 2% on every transaction in the bank.
No. That's a long way off. That requires much more work to be done. What I would suggest to you is please note that before 2012, you did not know that you can generate annually 3 lakh to 4 lakh crores of money by auctioning 2G spectrum. And this is not a one-time affair. 3G is coming, 4G, 5G. So this G means generation, by the way. Unfortunately, Manmohan Singh got it mixed up when somebody asked him, what is this 2G? He says, Sonia Ji and Rahul Ji. We have yet to fully auction coal. We'll get 11,000 crores, 11,000 lakh crores. If the amount of black money abroad, which we have not really seriously yet made an attempt, because I had spoken to the Prime Minister once about a year ago on how to bring it back quickly through the United Nations Convention on Corruption rules. He asked me for a note which I gave him. A great jurist called Fali Nariman has in fact written an article how it can be done. And if we adopt that, you will get 120 lakh crores from abroad. And what is your total income tax revenue? 5 lakh crores. That's all it is. So to say where you will get the money from, I'll say you auction your resources. In fact, even if you auction media rights for IPL, you will get 60,000 crores. You see. So there is plenty of resources in this country. It requires pricing. The correct pricing can only through auctions. And these are the things that you should hunt for. And increasingly give up those taxes which harass the Indian public and go to some things which are easy to do, especially with the e-auction.
Sir, if we abolish the Income Tax Act and replace it by the Banking Transactions Tax, the Banking Transactions Tax has already failed in 7 countries.
Yes. Now, whether it's failed or not, it's difficult for us to do it because the banking transactions doesn't cover all the tax-paying population, all the transactions that have to be, which are taking place at a shop level. That aside, there will be an incentive to avoid using banks because of the attraction of the Banking Transactions Act. So many minuses in it. These have to be rectified. It's a good proposal worth studying, but as of now, I'm not in favor of Banking Transaction Act. Yes, it's failed in Brazil, you're right, but doesn't mean it has to fail here. But at the moment, I don't think we are ready for it.
Sir, you have talked about thorium-based reactors.
Yes.
What India has imported and is importing all reactors which are based on uranium.
Yes.
Even fast breeder reactors are also based on uranium.
Yes.
So what are we going to do with the 70% of the world thorium reserves? Why can't this such a simple thing the government is realizing?
Well, Homi Bhabha did realize it, and he found that the monazite which is available on the sands of Tamil Nadu and Kerala have the, if properly refined, can be converted into thorium. You might be reading newspaper accounts that sand smuggling is taking place in Tamil Nadu. Now I thought only crazy people will export sand, which is available all over the world. But the sand of Tamil Nadu and Kerala have monazite which can be converted into thorium. And therefore, in the Western world, they realize that uranium will go completely, the supply will be finished by 2050. And therefore, they are looking for replacement and they are doing research on thorium. We had already done research of the 3 stages, 2 stages were completed, 1 stage was left. Then this Indo-American nuclear treaty was signed, and we are committed to buying uranium reactors from France and from America. But whatever costs we have sunk in it, it doesn't matter. We ultimately should plan for this thorium-based reactors, which will be the cleanest reactors from the environment point of view.
Sir, regarding this demonetization, would you feel it is a success or a failure? Because almost 98.96% of the money has come back. But again, one more thing is 90% of the money is back into the economy. Whether it will reduce our black money or corruption, sir.
If I say it's a failure, I'll be incriminating myself. Because in 2004, Mr. Modi had appointed a committee for the Lok Sabha elections called Strategic Action for the Lok Sabha polls, Strategic Action Committee, and I was appointed chairman, and we had recommended demonetization, but there were conditions attached to it which were not implemented. One was that there should be 6 times more 100 rupee notes than there are at the present. And those should be printed first. And I said it would take about 2 years. Then I said, also you can introduce a 200 rupee note also, if 500 and 1000 are going. In America, by the way, there is no note of a higher denomination than $100. But 100 and 200, fine. But I felt that when you announce the demonetization, you should declare that whatever cash you have, black, white, anything, you have the authority to deposit it in your personal bank account. No questions will be asked, but 25% will be taken away by the government. And 25% you can withdraw as cash in your new notes. And remaining 50% will be kept in for 5 years in a fixed deposit at 2% interest. Now, first of all, when the demonetization declared, there was no new currency printed. Second is this suggestion of mine that you can, later on, in middle of December or thereabouts, they implemented it, but the finance minister changed government's 25% share to 50% shares. And the 2% interest was removed. Now nobody went for it because the bank clerks and touts and all were giving at 25%. So why I should give government 50%, you see? So that was another failure that happened. Broadly speaking, I would say that previously I had 10,000 rupees in black, in old notes. Now I have 7,500 rupees in black, but in new notes. And the touts have got the remaining 25%. So the circulation of black money is more or less the same.
Hello.
But if you abolish income tax, the black money will be over very soon.
One last question.
This is the last question.
Yeah. So with China looking to dominate us everywhere, in UN, NSG and everywhere, and the military clash is out of option. So are we doing enough to break China's back economically? And if not, what should be done?
Well, you can have a long-term plan. If you develop your infrastructure, China is finished. Because that semi-processed goods will come to us. In fact, these East Asians whom I have talked to, Japanese, South Koreans, Taiwanese, they say, we prefer India because you have a court system, you have intellectual property that is internationally compliant. So we prefer, but he said there is, this horrible corruption. That, first of all, the roads are terrible. There are potholes everywhere. It takes long time to travel 200 kilometers. So as long as you don't improve your infrastructure, it will be difficult for us to come. And that's fair enough. And I think Mr. Gadkari has done a wonderful job, but he's been there only 3 years. And he needs more time. But I do think that we can change our infrastructure, because infrastructure doesn't require any great rocket technology, nor does it require highly skilled labor. So therefore we are in a great advantage to improve our infrastructure. And therefore I think China can be done this way. And of course this Malacca Strait, we are on one side of it and Indonesians are on the other side. If we have a pact that we will control that Malacca Strait, then China will be in great difficulty in that. I certainly personally believe that India and China should be normal friends, not resorting to war, and we should persuade China to give us a free hand in dealing with Pakistan, and this would be the great gain that we would have by a normal relations with China.
Sir, can I have one question, please?
Service by.
Yeah.
Service by. Yeah. After we will take your question. Service by, please.
I'll speak the truth, nothing but the truth. Why do we love
hearing Subramanian ji. I think we all love to hear him because somewhere he rekindles our conscience for the good of ourselves and the nation. The chartered accountants all over the nation have heard him, and I think what has fallen are the companies that are foreign companies, but Indian companies have survived. It is because we have always attacked the businessmen rather than the businesses. And chartered accountants have well protected the businesses. Dr. Subramanian Swamy, India's foremost and very vocal economist, besides being a mathematician and a very successful politician, having an opportunity to listen to the thoughts of such a learned intellectual and incredible fighter of the cause of political, social and legal reform is always an honor. There are many demands on his time, but he has kindly consented and graced this occasion and given the slice of his time and shared his thought with us.